Hello and welcome to the channel. I've been thinking a lot about startups recently and I've been involved in a number of them, but all of them have been started with at least one heavily technical person on the ground. They've got a computer person on the roster, someone like myself from day one. But a lot of startups aren't like that. A lot of startups are started by business people or creatives and they work on a prototype for a while and then they want to scale up. They want to bring on people like us. So this video is about helping those kind of peoples avoid the pitfalls that engineering can present if you get it wrong on day one. So this is aimed at early phase startups. So what am I talking about there? So roughly you might have, I mean, everything varies, but these six phases of startups, you've got the idea where you're testing a problem, talking to users, building some kind of prototype. Then you've got an early startup where you might have a couple of customers, you're finding your product market fit, you might be building out a small team. This is kind of what I'm looking at here into this kind of growth phase where you're growing some revenue and you're starting to scale up a little bit more quickly with product and sales. And then expansion where you're approaching maturity and you're hitting new markets and partnerships, and then maturity when you're really stable. And then exit, maybe some startups will exit, they'll sell out, they'll get acquired, they'll do an IPO, they'll pivot into something new. But what I'm looking at largely here is this early startup phase, maybe into growth, because this presents some new challenges, right? I'm focusing on going from a tiny number of people, one or two or three, going up to an early startup, maybe hiring your first engineers, um, going from purely an idea and a proof of concept to having a viable team and a product that can work efficiently. Now, one size isn't going to fit all. Your startup might look wildly different to this, but hopefully this will be of some utility, because what I'm looking at here is not a fully mature software engineering enterprise, but something more like a creative startup or a business startup, and they want to remain creative or business first. They don't want to just totally pivot and become engineers in the blood, like I am. And they're looking to define just enough process, just enough tooling, get just the right things in place so that it doesn't explode in this early phase. Like so many startups, they fail at the first hurdle, don't they? So as a startup, your cost of failure is incredibly high, especially before you've secured any funding or anything. Let's say you're self-funding or you're doing it in your spare time. You have a very limited what we call runway, which is the time and money and resources you've got available to you to get this idea in front of somebody and secure some funding. You need to achieve the takeoff before you run out of runway, your runway being those things that we mentioned. Now, if your engineers are wasting time through fault themselves or not, you're not making progress and you're not going to get into the air and you're just going to drive the plane off the cliff. And that is not what we want. So I think I used the word waste there, and this is a very loaded term in software engineering. It basically it encompasses lots of things like rework, having to do something again because it wasn't clearly specified the first time, right? This is a huge problem, and you need to know how to communicate with technical people, or you need to have somebody who does. Waiting, if Steve's building something and Jane is waiting for what Steve's building, if you've got those kind of sequential dependencies, that's waste as well. If Steve sat there doing this, unnecessary features, building something that never gets used. So let's say you've tried to build 100 features and then 90 of them don't get used. Well, that's waste. Poor communication. Oh yeah, I want the button blue. No, I didn't mean blue. I meant red. What a waste of time. Partially done work, stuff that's never been completed and shipped. So maybe you've bitten off too big a chunk. Excessive process, having to go through 19 levels of review before you can get to production. Defects, just things failing and being wrong and having bugs. And unnecessary handoffs, having to, engineer churn can cause this if you're not managing your engineers well and you burn them out and they all leave. So you're just trying to avoid waste on all these areas and more. So these are just some examples of waste. So when I use the word waste, that's what I mean. So you might get your excited new engineers come on board. They're great, let's build something together. And I'm going to call these people engineers, just technical people. I'll say engineers. Those are my words, whatever you're calling them, technical people, or maybe you've got some pejorative like nerds for us, but that's our word. You can't use that word. It can go well, or it can be an absolute train wreck and burn out both parties. So hopefully we'll avoid the bonfire effect of welcome to the team being shoved in. There's no point onboarding people if there's no structure, documentation, process to support them, unless that you're bringing them on to actually establish that, which is what I'm going to talk about next. But if you take on an engineer expecting them to just walk in and add value to your product, you need to rethink that quite substantially. It could do more harm than good if they walk in and just everything's on fire, everyone's doing things differently, there's no processes in place, and you don't give them the power to change that. There's going to be a real issue and they're just going to leave or burn out. However, Engineers are not magic, right? So you can't just add them. But what you can do is upfront make sure you've got a CTO, a chief technical officer, or at least somebody acting in that role. Now, this doesn't have to be the perfect person. It's just got to be someone until you maybe can hire a CTO or whatever it is. But you need someone who's defining the technical direction of the company and ensuring the teams, the tools, the architecture, and the processes they can successfully build and scale the product. Okay, so you might have to proceed without a formal chief technical officer, but you need someone who's fulfilling that function to help you avoid waste. Let's look at some of the things that CTO would do for you. So, your business or your ideas factory, this cloud on the left, that's giving you your direction, your values, your effects, what we would call in software engineering your requirements. And that CTO is hopefully someone who can translate that in the bottom right into technical work. They can define it in such a way that guys like myself can go, oh, right, yeah, I understand that. I can build that for you. And it's sufficiently clear that you can move forwards with it. There's nothing worse than getting a one-line requirement that says build X, and it's like, oh, what's X? You need to have all the context communicated, and we'll talk a bit about that later. So moving bottom to top, they will help eliminate waste. A CTO will observe the development practices and what's wrong, and if they will identify waste, and they will adjust process, adjust tooling, adjust training for that. They will oversee documentation because you never want to have to state something twice. You write it down in some kind of knowledge base. And part of building a startup is you build this knowledge base. You build internal knowledge about what you are, what you do, how to reproduce it. You as a startup generally want to turn something into potato stamp so you can reproduce it. The CTO will select tooling. What is the right platforms for you to use? What are the right tooling? They will analyze cost, security, convenience, how many people can use it, what licensing requirements there are, whether it works with your existing tooling. You need someone who is qualified to select that. The CTO would set up technical processes, and we'll talk a bit about what that might look like, because I'm assuming that some people potentially watching this will be of a technical startup, and this will all be gobbledygook to them. But hopefully, by the end of this, you'll understand what some of these things are. And finally, I'd expect a CTO to be supporting engineers, helping with onboarding, helping with one-to-ones. Now, the CTO role can vary in different companies. There's other things that some people might add, might remove. Some of this might fall under VP engineering or something, but let's assume you're a scrappy street fighting startup. This is employee 3 to 5, something like that. So let's have a look at what some of this might look like. Well, tools and process, I think of them as symbiotic. This is a key responsibility of a CTO, and this is something to get in place before you start adding 2, 3, 4 engineers. This is something you need to get in place fairly early so you don't have to pivot off a load of tools later, because that's waste, right? I use tool A, now I've got to port it all to tool B. Oh, it's not compatible. Right, I've just spent 3 weeks exporting and importing data. Waste, don't want it. So process and tools, they work together. Let's take an analogy. If I'm riding a bike, I'll take a different route to what I might take in my car versus walking or whatever. Likewise, in software, if you pick particular tools, they impose certain ways of working on you, or because you've got a certain way of working, you might pick a particular tool. And you'll get better outcomes if you pick the tools that work well processes. So a good CTO is going to know how to pick those, and you're going to need to, be quite cognizant of what's available. You don't want to just add 1,000 tools. You want as few tools as possible, so everyone knows where everything is, and it doesn't get out of hand with cost or with just kind of this tool spread. So there are some critical things. Source control management. I did a video on this a couple of weeks ago, so I'll not go over all that again, but hopefully I'll remember to link it in the description. There's an issue tracker, which I'll talk about momentarily. Documentation repository I've kind of touched on. And there's two that I'm not really going to go into much detail about, but continuous integration and deployment, easy for me to say, is basically when people make changes to your product that it automatically gets tested and then it gets rolled out automatically, hands off, so no one's wasting time with that. And that you've got an extra layer of quality that is applied, and things have to meet certain standards, so you can define that there. And development environments. So if you have a technical product, people need to be able to take it away and work on it without stepping on each other's toes. So there's something to be said for that. But I'm going to concentrate on the first three because they are absolutely critical. So issue tracking, what's issue tracking? Well, an issue or a ticket tracking or a way of apportioning work is you need to be able to carve out work for engineers to work on, so that you know who's working on what. And I'm not working on something, and Ahmed's working on something, and Dave's working on something. Oh, we're all doing the same thing. We've got parallel implementations. What a waste. We can't have that. So we carve up work with a ticket tracking service. Something like Jira or Asana has a Kanban board in it, which is a way of doing this. And the thing that you need to have, it just needs to have a unique number, a short descriptive title. So you're saying what the work is, so you can see it at a glance, and then the detail section will be what we call a user story, which is you've thought about, right, as this kind of user, I want to do this so that. So you're describing what the need for this feature is. So you're not just asking for something in a vacuum. So when a technical person sees the ticket, they can understand who they're building it for. It's not just an abstract thing. And then you've got the acceptance criteria, which is basically saying this is done when. Well, you might also have a definition of done separately, but basically you're saying, I want it to do this, this, and this. These are the functional requirements for this piece of work. Again, I am skimming over this stuff real quick, but I'm just trying to give a flavor of the sort of stuff. And then dependencies and links. So we talked about earlier a category of waste where Steve's waiting on Jane's work. This is where you make those things explicit and you can see them in your tool. Because it will have a view like this, so you can snapshot what's going on at any point. So you can see Yusuf's finished one of his tickets. He's got another one in progress. Lisa and Dave are working on stuff, and we've got 2 tickets on what we call the backlog. So what you do is you work on your ticket, you pull it off the backlog, you get working on it, and this is an example of a workflow where people are just taking the top ticket. You might have a priority queue, something like that. And then these are all industry terms that I know I'm just throwing at you at a million miles an hour, but I'm just trying to give a flavor of this stuff is there so that people have an organized and non-chaotic workflow. So generally you might work on one ticket at a time. So you are focused, you're delivering this one thing. And in startup land, that can change quite quickly. But if you have small, discrete pieces of work, and if you've architected your product in such a way that you can work in that way, that is very beneficial to what we call your velocity, which is how quickly you're able to deliver these tickets. And then over time, you can start building up kind of historical velocity. You can kind of have a rough idea of how much you can deliver in a particular period of time, so you know if you're slowing down or speeding up. Again, that's a whole other topic in and of itself. But what is this? Well, these are ways of agile working. That's the umbrella term for this. So it's delivering work in small, visible increments, adapting continuously based on feedback, and prioritizing collaboration over rigid plans. There's a lot of workflows off the shelf for this. Things like Kanban and Scrum are examples of agile workflow. But the core principle is what's on the screen here. And as a startup, your requirements are probably going to be in flux to some extent as more information comes to light, as you take on new clients, as this kind of thing. So you need to be able to deliver small slices of value very consistently rather than big banging, as we say, features out. You need to be able to pivot on a dime. Oh, we've had this new requirement. This is really important. We need this to win this bid, which comes into the field of sales engineering. But if you can pivot on a dime, you get a new requirement in, you can put a ticket at the top of the queue, you can get on it. And it's not like everyone's having to throw away weeks of partially completed work. You're trying to be small, discreet, deliver this thing, do it solid, move on to the next, and focus on one thing at a time. Because believe me, that's how engineers work best. We don't work well if you constantly rug pull us. You can do it occasionally, but if you give us a small piece, we can finish and deliver that and we can move on. That is how to get the best out of us in general. And if there's a big piece of work, we break it down. And that's one of the roles of the CTO, is to work with the engineers to say, how can we divide this up into smaller pieces of work that are discrete? So here's an example of the agile workflow. So maybe once a week you get together with your CTO, you say, these are the key things we need to accomplish now. And the CTO translates that into something that someone like me can understand. And defines those functional requirements and defines, right, it's got to work with this, it's got to work in this. So that person is acting almost like a translator from your business requirements. So a CTO needs to have an understanding of the business. They can't just be this abstract boffin, okay? And that's why not every engineer can be a CTO, because some of us are, a bit boffinish. And then the tickets are getting done. Let's say you've got a cadence of once a week, you're writing tickets once a week. And we're trying to do this kind of agile just-in-time thing. So we've got to have just enough light to proceed to the next step. We're not trying to over-engineer. We're not trying to overextend. We're trying to do just as much as we need to do. Then we review together maybe once a week. You might hear that called a retro. We look back at what we did, what worked, what didn't work, what is working as an organization. This is very valuable. You take the lessons about what's working at workflow and you adjust your workflow, you adjust your tools. None of this is set in stone in Agile. We're continuously improving, we're continuously self-evaluating. It's like if you're lifting weights, you're like, okay, well, what were my reps? What were my weights last week? How am I getting on with my progressive overload? If you've ever done any weightlifting, you'll understand that analogy is like you're looking at your data over time. And some of this data is just gut feel. It's like I felt this ticket was underspecified. Okay, well, how can we do better? And the final bit, the cadence, is the daily stand up, which a lot of teams do, which is just basically I'm working on this ticket and I've had this problem. Right, let's sort it now, or let's take it offline and discuss it afterwards. It's basically a chance to raise flags for anything that's arisen, anything that we didn't expect. So sometimes requirements will change. Sometimes you'll find, oh yeah, we were supposed to do X, but it's actually impossible because it doesn't support this, that, and the other. So there are many, many cases where you need to like pivot at that kind of cadence as well as a daily cadence, or even if it's super urgent, throw up a flag in real time. So that's a very quick potted example of an agile workflow. The other thing that's essential is source control. Now, this is just a slide from my last presentation, which I did on Perforce P4, and that's a centralized model. Something like Git is a distributed model, but the principle is that everybody has a way of making their changes in such a way that they can either merge or lock, so that I'm not working and ruining somebody else's work. I'm not going to go into a load of detail, but engineers need this in order to collaborate. This has to be up and running. Otherwise, if you're sending big zips backwards and forwards, I'm afraid that's a real anti-pattern and you are going to have waste like you wouldn't believe. So this is why this software exists. Use it. Documentation. Now, the idea that startups don't need to have docs is a fallacy. I consider it a first-class deliverable. I think I'm failing if I don't document. I really, really believe that. But it has to be made low friction. There's no point if I have to like put a Word doc on a drive and no one's ever going to read it. Like something like a wiki or another knowledge repository tool is really, really powerful here. If it's a Google Doc for now, it's a Google Doc for now. Have it somewhere, and then maybe at some point you put it elsewhere. But you have to be recording this stuff. If your engineers come on and only one person, Bob, who lives in a cupboard, knows how to build the product, that's no good. Everything has to be documented. Sometimes things can be automated instead of documented, but again, got to stay over track. There's so much scope to what I'm saying here. And finally, ideally, it should be searchable. I should be able to search across all the documentation. So if it's in multiple files or multiple drives, that can be really, really tricky. So ideally, I mean, you can train an AI on this stuff and query the AI these days. There's videos on my channel about doing that. But yeah, so documentation, absolutely essential. You're not going to get much velocity without it if you've got problems you need to solve over and over. So I've covered a lot of what a CTO does. Now, the reason I've framed it through a CTO is that you do kind of need somebody in that hole. These processes, these tools don't just come out of nowhere. Someone has to be the person that is calling for them and is setting them up, because it might be that you onboard somebody and they want to use Jira, somebody else wants to use, I don't know, Trello, somebody else wants to use something else. You can't let everybody have their own tools because it's going to end up in chaos, right? You have to standardize, and someone has to make the call. And that shouldn't be a person who is of a business mind, because it has to be technical decisions for technical people with an understanding of the business. Otherwise, why are you hiring technical people if you don't trust them to make the technical decisions? So it ain't going to be perfect and it ain't going to be pretty, because I'm targeting this startups that weren't technical to begin with. They're having to become more technical. They're having to take on somebody like that. So you are going to need either a CTO or an interim CTO, somebody to make these kind of calls, somebody who can set out this work for people, someone who can oversee the process, eliminate waste. Different organizations, their CTO role might be slightly different, but this is just a framework. You adjust it for your organization. The other role of a CTO, I think, is onboarding engineers and doing one-to-ones in a small organization like this. As it scales out, that role would filter down the org chart. But doing regular one-to-ones and checking in with engineers and just seeing if they've got any pain points, if they've got any ideas, suggestions, just being on top of organizing your team, making sure they're happy, making sure that they've got what they need to do a good job. So that's all I'm going to cover today. I know it was a real whistle-stop tour through a J random startup. What do I do? You know, I've got to hire some devs. That should be enough to give you some ideas. If you do want to have a chat about it, do feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching. Now, these videos aren't necessarily about my areas of like S tier experience, but they're areas of growth and research and things I'm thinking about. But do feel free to browse around the rest of my channel, and thank you again for watching.